Hi everyone. My name is Sabrina McGraw. I am the president of Californians Advancing Civic Education, which is the nonprofit putting on these summer programs today. And we are dedicated to helping you, your schools, go through this We the People program. So we offer a bunch of different modes of support. This is our first event of the year, and we're really excited to have you all. I see people from Arcadia, Amador, Foothill, Arvin. It's really wonderful to have you all joining, and we hope to work more with your schools as the year goes on. This is the first summer session of 3 summer sessions, which hopefully you know about by now. Our next one is next Sunday. The point of these summer sessions is to jumpstart this program. And so the goal is to give you the information that you need to get jump started into this program as you start in the new school year. And so we are really excited to help you with that. I'll also note that CACE doesn't stop just in the summer. When you start your school year, we also put on a session of testimony writing to give you a sense of how to get that going. And also, we help each school put on a practice at every level of competition that your school participates in. We also have a hand in putting on the NorCal district and regional competitions. And many of our volunteers are involved at both the state competition and nationals. So we are a resource of a bunch of people who've been involved since the start. So with that, I'm going to have each volunteer introduce themselves, and I will start. And then once a volunteer has introduced yourselves, just call on another person. And then the last person can call on all the CASE volunteers groups so that everyone in the room can introduce themselves over there too. And I'd like, if possible, for the volunteers to put their cameras on so that we can see everyone. I think that would be great. So as I said, I'm Sabrina McGraw. I'm president of Californians Advancing Civic Education. I was in this program at Amador Valley, and I was in Unit 5 back in 2013. Our school competed and we won state, and then we got to go to nationals and got second place. It was a really wonderful experience, and it made me want to become a lawyer. So I went to UC Santa Barbara for undergrad and then UC Berkeley for law school. And now I'm a practicing attorney in litigation at the law firm Covington and Burling in San Francisco. So with that, I'll have Clint introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Clint Woods. I am a Deputy Attorney General for the state of California in the government law section. So I handle constitutional challenges on behalf of the state of California. I'm also an alum of the program back in 1995, a long time ago. I did this program at Amador Valley High School, and we won the state and national titles. Big deal, or whatever. They literally gave us a parade in downtown Pleasanton. It was so silly. Anyway, yeah, I've been a volunteer for the program at various levels for almost 18 years now, and helped start CASE. And I'm really excited to help today. So I will pass it over to Nathan.
Hello, hello. My name is Nathan T. Stone Lev. I'm a program manager for the Washington Metropolitan Area Regional Transit Authority. I am also an alum of the program. I was Irvington High 2016 alum. Yeah, I'm really excited to be helping out. I'll pass it off to Ria.
Hi, my name is Ria Shroff. I'm a biomedical engineer now, working in the medical device industry. This is year 10 of me being part of the program. I was part of Amador 2015, and we went to nationals, got 6th that year, so that was a lot of fun. It's a fun program all the way through. Looking forward to working with all of you guys this year. I'll pass it to Katie.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Katie. I am an alum of the program from San Ramon Valley High School in 2016. I was in Unit 6. Nowadays, I am a park ranger. I work for the National Park Service at Muir Woods, helping people connect with the Redwood Forest. In a past life, too, I also worked in the California State Legislature. So, all sorts of things along the way. I'll pass it to Suba as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Suba. I am an alum of Foothill High School's We the People program. I was in Unit 5 many years ago at this point. And now I work at Snapchat as a product manager. So there are other options, as many folks on the call have mentioned, is that you don't have to come out of this program being a lawyer. There's a lot of ways that you can still stay involved, even if you're not even thinking about political science as like a future option for you. And then I don't know if we have any more volunteers. I guess the CACE volunteers, do you all want to turn on your camera and introduce yourselves?
Hi, I think I'm gonna talk and then I'm gonna just pass the computer around. Hi, my name is Patrick. I was Foothills Unit 5 last year, so 2024, and I'll be going to UC Berkeley next year.
Hi, my name is Sophia Stomhagen. I'm Amador Valley's Unit 3 from last year, and I'm going to UC Santa Barbara. Go Gauchos.
Hey, I'm Runab Dixit. I was on Amador's Unit 3 last year, and I'm going to the University of Washington.
Hi, I'm Owen Short. I was also on Amador's Unit 3, and I'm going to NYU.
Hi, I'm Peter. I was on Foothills Unit 4 last year, and I'm a rising freshman at Stanford.
Hi, I'm Nabiha Zafar. I'm from Foothill Unit 2 last year, and I'm going to San Jose State.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I was also Foothills Unit 2 last year, and I'll be at Northeastern in the fall.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm also from Unit 2 at Foothill last year, and I'm going to be going to UC Davis.
Cool. That's all of us.
Hello. We love to see it. This is so fun.
Did we get all the volunteers? Speak up now if we missed anyone who maybe doesn't have their camera on. Okay, great. Well, as you can see, all of these people are here today because we love the program. We come back year after year, or in the case of the CACE volunteers room, come back after participating in the program because this program means a lot to us. And, again, like Suba said, it goes beyond just being interested in becoming a lawyer or political science. Great if you want to. But you learn a lot of other skills in this course. You make a lot of great friends. You learn public speaking skills. You got to meet a bunch of really cool people. And so we really love this program. And so all the people here today are, doing it for free, using their time. And throughout the year, you'll see CACE volunteers helping with this program. And so I just wanted to say quick thanks to everyone who's come here today as a volunteer and going forward helping out with this program. So one thing I wanted to note, aside from kind of the overview I gave about how CACE is involved, is we're also here as a resource. So for the schools who are permitted to use Discord, we have Discord channels set up for your schools where we can communicate and share items about news items that come through that we think might be relevant to the questions you're working on. And also it's an opportunity for us to be able to review your testimonies if you have specific questions for us about how those items go. So Discord's the best way to reach out to us if your school is able to use Discord. If your school is not using Discord, that's fine too. You can reach out to us throughout the year via email. And I will make sure that all your schools have access to our CACE emails in order to do that. So just know that you can reach out to us outside of the set parameters we have for the summer sessions, as well as the practices that we have set up. And also, if your school has sort of a different practice schedule in mind, we can also meet with units individually as well. So don't be afraid to reach out to us. Just remember, as through the year, that we are a resource to you, all of the schools in California, to support you through this program. So before we move on to the next item on our agenda, I wanted to know if any CACE volunteers have anything else to add about what CACE does, aside from what I've already covered. Hearing none, we will move on to the first sort of substantive part of our schedule today, which is how a hearing works. We're going to be talking about the format and also the score sheet. So with that, I will hand it off to Nathan. Nathan, I have it up if you want me to screen share for you. That's easy.
That would be wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. And I just ask everyone to turn off their cameras if you're not Nathan, just so that it's easier for the screen share to look nice with the recording. Oh, that is one thing I wanted to mention. This session is being recorded. All the summer sessions will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. Later on in the day, when we go out to breakout sessions, the recording will be paused, but I just wanted to let you know all of that in case that's important to you. Thanks.
All right. So, um, I'll be walking through how a hearing works. Um, First, let's start with how the units are. You'll hear it a lot for these summer sessions, and even if you've heard it before, but you're going to be split out into units eventually. And a unit is a panel of 3 to 6 students that work together on a content focus in US constitutional history. So each of those 6 units, you'll become specialists in an area of study and prepare answers to 3 questions for competition. If we scroll down a little to sort of help give the whole visual in, you have Unit 1 as really the foundation. It's the historical and philosophical foundations of government. On top of that, you have Units 2 through 5 as like the pillars of where that foundation is going, building up, building upon it. So for Unit 2, we have the framing of the Constitution. Unit 3 is voting, due process, equal protection, and the Civil War. Unit 4 is the institutions of the US government. Unit 5 is the Bill of Rights. And then on top of all of that, you have Unit 6, which has a more practical in the sense, practical application in the sense that, we're taking everything from units 1 to 5, we're applying it to current day, current events, and where we're going in the future. And Unit 6 is the citizen and society in a globalized world. So it sort of ties in not just the US, but also international flavor to some extent. Let's scroll down to the next page. So a basic hearing structure is very formulaic. You're going to have the introductions, so judges, case volunteers, other people involved with the program will introduce ourselves. We'll then ask you in your units to introduce yourselves. The judges will then ask the panel the question that you've been working on, and this section is not timed in any sense. As soon as the panel begins reading their answer, that is when the timer begins. And this reading of an answer under congressional testimony is a prepared statement. So this is something that you'll be working on in class, outside of class, with your unit mates, with the rest of your class as a whole, to address and answer specific questions. There will be 3 main questions, and each of those main questions will have sub-questions, and all of those must be addressed. In my first practice with my unit, we literally only addressed the main question and got in a lot of trouble because we didn't address the sub-questions in any way. So just remember to address every point of a question. This testimony can be read from a script or notes, or it can be memorized. And this section is going to be no more than 4 minutes. You will get cut off if you go over. Then we move into Q&A. All notes will be put away from the panel, and judges will begin asking questions about the content of the testimony answer. The questions and connections to other relevant material will also be worked in during this section. And this section, depending on which competition you're at, whether it's district, state, nationals, it'll float between 6 and 10 minutes based on how far along you are. And then finally, you'll get feedback from the judges. Each judge will typically have about 3 minutes of feedback. Sometimes it's longer if they have a lot to say. But it's usually focused on a couple aspects of the presentation, either the testimony or the Q&A. And then you, as the panel, are going to want to take notes based on our feedback, so that you can get better and continue to progress in your knowledge and understanding of the subject matter. And if we scroll down, it's just the sort of physical layout of what the hearings are going to be. We're going to have tables set up on one side where you'll sit, a table set up for the panel of judges, and then beyond that, everybody else, the other units waiting in the wings, interested folks like parents or friends or teachers will sit in the audience. And yeah, that is the structure of a basic hearing. I believe you asked me to go over a couple other things, just like showing quickly the structure of the questions. So as I mentioned, just on this first page, this is like an example of some of the district questions. You'll get like your unit and the overall topic, and then you'll get 3 questions. So each of those 3 questions with the numbers is your main question. That's going to be the sort of overarching subtopic for the unit. And then each bullet point is going to go into further detail relating to that sort of subtopic for the question. On a very base level, you'll have a lot of time to go over these and discuss nuances. And finally, I believe we're going to give a quick view of the scoring guide. So all of the judges will have the scoring rubric in front of them, and we will note down what we think your score is based on whether you hit certain elements, and it note down where we think you can do better, where we think you did outstanding. And yeah, that's the very basic general overview of what the hearing will be.
Rookie mistake. Thanks, Nathan. We'll open up questions in a bit, but I just wanted to mention a few things. So this is kind of supposed to be like a little bit of a primer of the program, so you'll hear us say a lot of these things over and over again, but I wanted to note a few things just to keep in mind as you start going through the program. The first is, I think it's really important that you study the scoring rubric and that you take it into account when you are drafting your opening statement and also when you're going over questions, because this is exactly what the judges are going to be looking at when they are scoring. And the rubric goes into detail about what sort of meets expectations, and then we'll often provide comments about what items exceed expectations and opportunities for growth. One thing I wanted to flag is this rubric is actually quite new. It was new as of last year. And so there were some changes made to it. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to people who participated in the program in previous years. And in particular, I think the biggest change in the rubric from the previous years, aside from last year, is that the opening statement is now its own category. It used to be that you were graded on a rubric that counted for the opening statement and the question and answer period. But now the opening statement is its own category, and the question and answer period applies for all of the rest of the categories. So just keep that in mind when you're drafting everything, that you have to hit all of these items within these other categories. And later today, we're going to talk about break down the score sheet on specific categories for about half of them. And then at a later summer session, we're going to cover the remaining items. So we'll go into detail about what everything means, but I just want you to remember that you shouldn't be forgetting that this score sheet exists. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is, there are a bunch of different units, and you're going to be assigned to different units once the school year starts. And you're going to be really focused on your questions. But I think what's critical about this program is that you listen to your other classmates' presentations throughout the year, even if they're not your unit, because although they seem like separate categories, all of them really play into each other, and they are critical for understanding and giving your own unit context. There's plenty of times where judges will cross different units when they're asking questions. And so being able to learn about what your other units are doing is really critical. For example, during nationals, I was a unit 5, and the judge out of nowhere asked a unit 4 question, just straight up. And we had been paying attention to our unit 4 presentation, and we were able, without even having read the materials ourselves, we just verbatim stated what our unit 4 group had said in a prior testimony, and we nailed the question because we were listening. So I just want you to keep that in mind as you go through this program. And do any other CACE volunteers have any other kind of general insight or comments about how the hearing works, generally about the rubric and questions? All right, so as you all probably could see from the agenda we have today, we are going to have a sample alumni hearing and debrief. So they're going to model for you what a typical hearing looks like. And so I'm going to hand it off to our wonderful judges and panel to get going, and hopefully they will also mention the question that's going to be answered today.
Here, yeah, I'll turn it. Cool. Hello, we are the judges, the judges. How are we introducing ourselves?
Tell your backstory.
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Peter. I was unit 4 last year. Great unit, you guys should do it. I'm going to Stanford this year. I'll probably be studying physics or geophysics, maybe double majoring in something computer sciencey.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah. I was in unit 2, best unit in my opinion. I'll be at Northeastern University in the fall, double majoring in English and political science.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I was also unit 2 at Foothill last year with Sarah, and I'm going to be at UC Davis, double majoring in economics and political science.
Hello, my name is Sophia Stomhagen. I was unit 3 at Amador last year. It is actually the best unit. You should be going in. And I'm going to UC Santa Barbara. And now I will read you your question. Your question is number 1.
Let them introduce themselves.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourselves.
So nice to meet you. Good morning. We are Foothill and Amador High School's Unit 0, representing the organization Californians Advancing Civic Education. My name is Patrick Bennett.
My name is Renaud Dixit.
My name is Owen Short.
My name is Nabiha Zafar. We'd like to thank the judges, audience, and timekeeper for being here today, as well as introduce our coaches. Not applicable right now.
Okay, thank you. Your question today is question 1. What is We the People? How did We the People impact your understanding of rights, responsibility, and citizenship? You may begin when ready.
We the People is a civic education program that engages students in a comprehensive study of the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the principles of democratic government. Through this program, students like ourselves have gained a deep appreciation for American democracy and the importance of active citizenship.
The program combines meticulous research with real-world application. We focus on historical documents, Supreme Court cases, and philosophy, developing critical thinking skills and a nuanced understanding of constitutional principles. Our research comes together in this stimulated congressional hearing, where we present our knowledge in a testimony and defend our positions on complex constitutional issues in a follow-up question and answer period.
The We the People program has instilled in us an understanding of our constitutional rights, their historical context, and their modern-day application. For example, we've studied the First Amendment protections of free speech, as interpreted in landmark cases like Tinker v. Des Moines, 1967, which upheld students' right to symbolic speech in schools.
We've learned that rights come with responsibilities and limitations, as exemplified by cases like Schenck v. United States, 1919, which established the, quote, clear and present danger test for limiting free speech. Through studying book bans, limitations on guns, and understanding changing voter demographics, we've not only been able to understand our own rights, but moreover, the rights of entities beyond us.
We the People has impacted our notion of citizenship, emphasizing that citizenship is not passive but requires active participation. We've learned the importance of civic engagement, engaging in civil discourse, and our civic responsibilities. The program has given us a deep appreciation for the Constitution as a living, breathing document. We have analyzed how its interpretation has changed history and how it continues to shape our nation today. For example, we've studied how the Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, has been broadly interpreted in cases like Gibbons v. Ogden, 1824, to expand federal power to regulate the economy.
Through We the People, we've come to understand that civic responsibility extends beyond voting. We've learned about jury duty as a fundamental civic obligation protected in the 6th and 7th Amendments. In addition, we've studied the role of civil disobedience in shaping public policy, as seen in the civil rights movement. With the upcoming 2024 presidential election, We the People has expanded our understanding of today's politics, giving us the tools to critically analyze modern events and the importance of voting as a crucial civic duty. Through the program, we feel more confident that we're able to make informed decisions in the upcoming election season.
We the People also taught us about personal responsibilities, particularly how to disagree with one another and work with different personalities. When expressing our opinions, we needed to disagree. For example, at Nationals, my Unit 5 disagreed on Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard 2023, where three of my unit mates supported affirmative action while two did not. Writing a testimony that way taught us how to disagree on a heated issue while still respecting each other. That skill further applies to national political debates, as we're able to understand the perspective of the other side of the aisle.
We the People also taught us humility, facing the fact that there will always be topics that you won't know about or questions that you're not completely ready to discuss. We the People has taught us that none of us are perfect. We all misremember evidence, freeze up, or lose our patience at points. However, being in this program has taught us that it is part of our responsibility to face our shortcomings and work together as a unit and a team in order to address them and uplift each other.
We the People has transformed our understanding of American democracy, from abstract concepts to lived experiences. Through We the People, we've gained the tools to participate in and defend a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you.
So, why do you think that Americans should care about the rights stated in a document that was made over 200 years ago? Like, does the Constitution and the Bill of Rights still hold relevance today? Why?
I think it absolutely does. And we can see how it mattered even yesterday with President Trump's shooting. I don't want to call it something odd. The Second Amendment has long protected guns and particularly assault rifles in America. Just 2 years ago, California Governor Gavin Newsom proposed the 28th Amendment to ban weapons like assault rifles that were likely used in President Trump's shooting. And so, but this ban still hasn't gone through, which is why the shooter, who has now been identified as 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, was able to get his hands on that weapon. And so by seeing that, we see that the Second Amendment's protections are still causing chaos in the modern day. So it is clearly still important.
Although Patrick brings up a good point, I do believe that modern implications of the Constitution do question its validation today, more specifically with Article 3 and the wording of good behavior for Supreme Court justices. I believe that when it comes to Article 3, and for example with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez bringing up impeachment paperwork for Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, we can see that the good behavior clause is not necessarily as well interpreted today because of its poor definition dating back to the Constitution, and that's one of the specific portions of the Constitution that I believe is not fleshed out well today.
Additionally, in the important constitutional principles within the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, it's important to understand the historical context and why they're necessary to discuss today. And this involves going back to the 1800s and understanding why the framers wanted to involve them in these important documents. And if we understand that, we're able to further understand why they are such a core part of our nation and why they are included in such a sanctious document as the Constitution or Bill of Rights.
So, Patrick, you bring up a really interesting point about Donald Trump's shooting. So, in your opinions, does Trump's misshooting yesterday affect the 2024 presidential election or his own personal view of ordered liberty as seen in the Second Amendment?
I do not believe that Trump, and more specifically the Republican Party's position on the sort of concept of ordered liberty, will be greatly impacted by the shooting. And this is due to the fact that the Republican National Convention has already agreed upon essentially their 16-page sort of document to show off what their positions are on various issues. And with significant funding from special interest groups such as the National Rifle Association, among others, it is unlikely that this event will greatly change their position on gun rights in the United States.
I disagree with Owen regarding the implications of the change in the Republican Party's platform regarding gun rights. We can see that with the shooter being identified as a registered Republican, it might change several Republican voters' minds regarding whether or not gun rights is a significant issue going into the 2024 election, and whether or not Republican representatives, whether that be in the House, the Senate, or ultimately with presidential candidate Donald Trump, will ultimately uphold their beliefs, seeing with how visually, since guns are super accessible, they can be become such a larger threat towards potentially an idol, as we can see with Donald Trump.
I actually like to take a different perspective than my unit mates. I think regardless of whether or not it does change people's minds, I think it's only a pattern that we've seen. And I think if it does change someone's mind, then they're blind to what's happening in our country. Last year, there were 660 incidents similar to President Trump, where more than 4 people were injured or killed in a mass shooting. That's almost 2 every single day. So this is not some isolated incident that's some new revealing fact about the state of gun violence in our country. And I think that it only goes to illustrate how isolated members of Congress are from their communities. Because these incidents are happening every day, but because they only get high profile attention when a major political figure is involved, I think politicians are too far removed from the people just because of this event.
Cool. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Switching topics a little bit, you guys claim to have a deep appreciation for active citizenship or civic virtue, but how do you plan to realize that in your own lives and in the lives of many of your peers who are often apathetic about modern day politics?
I think one thing that's unique about this upcoming election is that there's so much at stake when it comes to the foundations of our country and it being threatened. For example, if we look at the recent court case, Trump v. United States 2024, the court decided that presidents who perform illegal acts can have a certain amount of immunity if it falls under the official acts of president. So I believe that because these democratic principles of holding the president above the law is being threatened, I think that is especially important and will bring more people into to caring more about what's going on within our country. And I feel we can see that online in social media and spaces like social media. We can see that so many people have started to come in and give their opinion on these historical events. So I think it is gonna be incredibly effective to bringing apathetic people into voting.
As far as what I would do to sort of display active citizenship is I would encourage people to, one, vote, and to secondly, actually look into issues instead of looking at kind of surface level events such as the presidential debate. And while that debate may have shown off some inadequacies of some of the candidates, I would argue that on TikTok, for instance, we've seen thousands of videos with edits of the debate or even misinformation about it that are more revolved around the personality of the candidates other than what they actually stand for in terms of the Constitution, in terms of our laws. And I would encourage people to make informed decisions about policy when voting, not just decisions about personality.
Cool. Thank you guys. I want to pick up on sort of the thread of what we were talking about with talking about the Constitution itself. A lot of this kind of modern discussion we've had isn't what we the people is sometimes. A lot of it is studying stuff from, the 1800s with Unit 3, the 1700s with Unit 2, maybe even earlier with stuff like British common law and philosophy. I'm wondering, why is that kind of thing relevant to study? How does it like inform these kind of modern discussions we've been having?
I believe that one of the reasons such textual interpretation, including things going back to British common law, philosophy, original writings such as the Northwest Ordinance from the Northwest Ordinance going into Marbury v. Madison 1803, I believe that a lot of these fundamental issues are irrelevant towards understanding our constitutional application today, and just seeing how our framers originally intended for our government to be run. We can see that things have changed with the 17th Amendment limiting the way that we vote our senators. We can see that gun rights and different ways that we define rights to substantive due process have also manipulated. And I believe looking back and referring to previous precedent helps us understand and pick up on a larger thought process behind why originally some rights were established in a specific way, and ultimately why some things were left a little bit more out of reach than others, and ultimately why the framers valued those compared from back then to today.
Sure, and it's also important to look back sometimes at old laws in order to actually see what could happen moving forward, and especially with recent controversial Supreme Court decisions, such as Bruin v. New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, which required sort of a historical precedent for gun regulations. That's made it increasingly important for people.
That's time.
My thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, that's made it increasingly important to look back at old laws to see what could be done moving forward. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'll start with some feedback. I thought you guys had really good spacing out on Q&A. You made sure that people got, and that's important because you don't want to be dominating the conversation. I also like that you always disagree on the panel. It's very good to take an opinion because just stating facts is boring and also won't get you much appreciation from the judges. So taking a stance, a strong stance in any direction, either left or right, is always good. And I really appreciate that. Good job.
Okay, testimony wise, I think that you guys had really good articulation and testimony and speaking speed. In my opinion, if you want to try to boost your public speaking by like a lot, just speak clearly, slowly, and loudly, which I think you guys did a really good job of. And I liked how clear signposting was. You very clearly let us know when you guys were shifting the topic, and it made it a lot more straightforward to follow, especially if we're only hearing it. And during the Q&A, you guys did a really good job of taking turns, making sure that everybody spoke once before somebody was speaking the second time. I did think that you guys were taking a little bit too long to respond. Patrick, no hate, but your first response was 50 seconds when ideally it should be like 30 to 35 seconds, but it happens to everybody. And like Sophia said, disagreement is good. I love how you guys disagree with each other a lot. Good statistics, numbers always back up your argument a lot better. And filler words, I know that you guys are making a conscious effort to not include filler words, which I appreciate.
Okay. So the evidence, I loved how much evidence there was. That's always a good thing. I think that's also a testament to how much people affect your life, that's just permanently ingrained in your head. But I think the best part was that, for example, on my question, you answered both parts of the question. So Nabiha answered the second part and then Owen came back to the first. I think a lot of judges often use that as a trap to, I don't know, try to take off some points or try to mess with your head. So it's really important to listen to what the judge is saying and then answer the question fully, which you guys did.
I really appreciated the kind of modern discussion we had. When we started with that constitutional question, I was expecting, like some discussion, maybe Unit 2 stuff, like how did that happen? How does it inform today? And then the first words out of Patrick's mouth are like, so when Donald Trump nearly got shot yesterday. I really appreciated that. I appreciated stuff like Trump v. US 2024, a lot of stuff that we didn't even study because it happened after nationals, after like in the last couple of months. Same things about disagreement. I think you guys talked effectively, made your points effectively. I appreciate it. Good job. I think we are done then.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. So just for everyone listening in, these were all folks who did the program last year and took time out of their summer before going to college to put this together, and I think they did a fantastic job of demonstrating what a hearing or testimony, a Q&A period, and feedback from judges looks like. And that was like a really great example. I loved that you had modern examples, statistics, everything. Really pleased with your presentation, so I appreciate that. Before you head off, I'd love to open up the floor in case any of the students coming into the program want to use this opportunity to ask people who just came out of it questions about your experiences. So if that's okay, I'm gonna open it up. Feel free to turn on your camera to ask your question, or you can put one in the chat and I can put it to the group. So this is your opportunity to hear from people who just finished the program about what it's like. Anyone have any questions?
I have a question for them if no one else does at this point. I want to follow up on something that they mentioned in their testimony about how failure and making mistakes helped them succeed as they went forward. And I was wondering if folks could come up with some specific examples that times when you either made a mistake, failed, your teacher said what you were doing was wrong, and how you use that in order to make yourself better going forward.
Yeah, I think one way is that if we fail and make the wrong decision, it informs us as to what the right decision is. For example, early in like the district cycle, my unit, we had a discussion about the Senate because that pertained to our question, and we ended up arguing about it for 2 periods, and the argument did not go anywhere. We didn't find any solution. It wasn't productive at all. And so that failure helped us realize that we can't be doing that the whole year. That's not going to work. And so we have to come in with a more compromised mindset rather than just wanting to get our own ideas out there. We have to actually work with one another instead of just talking at each other.
I know for like I can speak from our experience, but so for states is the competition you're gonna have in February, but for in January, kind of like the month preparing up to states, our unit 3, we had a question regarding President Lincoln and like the constitutionality of his president. And so our unit initially, we struggled a lot with kind of setting the parameters for how we would define and kind of account for different kind of presidencies, because if, for example, I'm talking to any future unit 3s, you will potentially look into him. You guys will probably learn to study Lincoln like compared to FDR and like kind of yo-yoing back and forth. And so we struggled a lot with that initially. And so like in that process, we presented several testimonies kind of within those weeks that were not good testimonies, and they did not get like, we did not have a good Q&A or a hot seat right after them, and we got like some pretty harsh feedback. And so I feel like I would count that as a failure just because we were still kind of like picking it up, but ultimately like that's the highest scoring question we had at state, and it helped us a lot. And I think like those kind of failed experiences and just kind of doing more and more research and getting past that learning curve and like constantly failing was, I think that's the most kind of growth we had, I think, like within the program.
Yeah, echoing Runav's point a little bit, I think for us, the testimonies we always felt were worst, maybe like a couple weeks out from competition, were always the ones we scored highest on. I remember there was one during the state cycle, so again, also in January, or about 2 weeks out from the competition. I think our coach, Mr. McBride, was like, you guys simply don't have enough evidence like right now, and you guys really need to work on it. And this was like a week or 2 before competition. We were really freaking out. But that ended up being, I think, by far our best testimony at states. I think it only goes to show that like when we do something wrong like that, and when we're told that we've done something wrong, I think that motivated all of us a lot more to keep working, keep studying, keep practicing. I think that was, and then I think as well, I think Foothill lost to Amador by about 10 points at the state competition. And that sort of loss kind of fueled some more studying for nationals, a lot more practicing. And so I think bouncing back from that and winning 3rd at the national competition, no hate to Amador, but I think that success for us coming off of that failure, I think it just motivated us a lot more to put more work in those like 2.5 months in between.
Is anything from your side?
All right, we have a question from a student. A question about judge feedback. So if one doesn't understand the judge feedback or had a follow-up question to further understand, is it acceptable to ask the judges for clarification? And maybe we can have the CACE volunteer judges answer this one.
Oh,
Okay, so I don't know if the question was a question about when you're getting feedback after the Q&A portion or
like during.
yeah, like when the questions are
Maybe answer both.
okay. So when Q&A is done and you've been given feedback, me personally, our unit would not ask about the feedback. But when Q&A is going on, when the judges are asking you questions and you don't understand the question, I think you're allowed to ask the judge because you want to be able to answer the judge's question to the best of your ability. And you want to show off the knowledge that you've spent so much work putting into. So in that case, yes, you're absolutely allowed to ask the judge a question, a clarifying question about the question that he or she is asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a last resort though, because like obviously you want to seem like prepared and smooth and whatnot. So even if the judge asks like kind of a confusing question, usually you just like, if no one has an idea, like everyone's waiting for a couple seconds, someone just like jumps in and deals with it however you want. You can take it in a different question or in a different direction, geez. I maybe you guys did that more than us, but I think we maybe only did it like once or twice throughout the entire year.
And I'd just like to clarify, I think if you are doing practices, and you have like a fake judge panel, that is absolutely getting feedback and asking for clarification is perfectly acceptable. And in fact, you should absolutely do it any chance you get. But when it comes to the competition, judges are only giving like 1 or 2 minutes worth of feedback, and it's just for you to take back to the next competition or whatever you're going to do after that. And so there's not enough time really to ask judges follow-up questions, but you're always, after a competition, you can always reach out to your teacher who can reach out to the judges if there is clarification that you want further. And so that's also kind of a way to do it. With that, looks like Katie has hand raised.
Yeah, I always love the summer session because it's fun to get to see y'all after like a full school year of doing your thing and, killing it again. Take a moment though and think back to where you were last summer. Is there anything you wish you had known going into the program that like if you could, tell that version of you that like what would you share? What would you share with a student that's just heading into this as advice or just kind of things to keep in mind over the next few months?
Yeah, I just want to say you only have 1 year worth of We the People. And I'm thinking about it now. It was so much fun. Like, you don't have that mindset of competition after you're done. Like, you can volunteer for CASE, you can research the questions if you want, but you don't have that end game passion in you almost. So take advantage of it while you're in the program because you only have this one shot at being the best you can possibly be. And it's a good thing. You should go after it because this is when you're going to learn the most because you're motivated the most. So do your work. It's going to be fun and you're going to like it afterwards and during it.
A little caveat there. You're probably not going to have the like gung-ho weeple sense that we all do.
Yeah.
Because you haven't been through a year. You've been through like probably like a bunch of chapters of textbook reading. Yeah. For Foothill at least, that's what we suggest. And so this might not be as fun right now. What's fun is like after you get past like the memorizing point, like first part of the school year, and when you can get into like doing your own research. That's the really cool part.
Yeah.
Also, I think going into the year, like knowing what exact unit you want and like just having that unit in mind, I think it can be detrimental. Like I went into it like having a couple units that I had my eye on, but I think you should really try to open your eyes like when you're learning about the different units. Don't try to stick to one. There's one that may like surprise you and there's one that you may realize you didn't like as much as you thought you did. So I think keeping an open mind when it comes to learning about the different topics, I think that's incredibly important also.
Kind of bouncing off what Sophia said, I think you can make this experience one of the most fun things ever as long as you allow yourself to have fun. And I think one of the ways to do that, and I think like this is my kind of takeaway, but spend time on the summer assignment. I'm aware of kind of how Foothill does it, but like regarding Amadors, because you guys don't have like set due dates over the summer in terms of like turning things in every couple of weeks, and you're turning everything in at like one shot at on the first day of school, spend time on it and actually like understand what you're going into, because arguably that's the hardest part of this class, because everything else you're doing, starting preparing for competition and everything, that is stuff you're interested in, and that stuff is like fun to argue with your unit mates about. Right now it's like you're in the trenches right now fighting for your life with the summer assignment and like reading the most boring things known to man. But if you persevered through it, like there have been countless occasions. Miss Sklar has talked about, for example, on your summer assignment, you have like, I think it's like part 4 or 5, which is like 11 court cases that are relevant from like this past cycle. There have been so many times, at least in our year, when Miss Sklar was like, yeah, you should have answered that question with that court case. And it's like, that's just kind of, it makes the class a lot more fun because the summer assignment is just the base for everything. And so I think like the best way to allow yourself to have fun is actually spend time in the summer assignment and not just doing it like 2 days or 3 days before it's due.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything they've said so far, but I have a bit of a different perspective on it. I think for me, the biggest thing I would tell someone coming into the program is to keep an open mind about the people you're going to work with. I think we had a class of 29, and I think I worked with everyone in the class at some point, like having to have a conversation, like texting someone for an extra resource, or my actual unit mates working with them. And I think at the start of the year, I thought there were some people who I'd end up in a unit with. I had a couple of friends going into the class, and I ended up being placed in a unit that where I hadn't worked with any of the other 4 members of my unit before. But by the end of the year, and I think by the state cycle, we were really close friends. I think before the last night of states, we all gathered in our hotel room and we cried together over some personal stories and experiences. And I think coming from not knowing them 3 or 4 months before to that level of vulnerability and like I think was really special for me. But I think it's really important to have an open mind about those people. You might have someone you don't like in the class or someone you think you don't like. But I think no matter what, you can always get past that. And I think by the end of the year, I would absolutely call all 4 of my unit mates my really close friends. And I'm lucky I could say that.
Yeah, I'd like to add real quick. Don't make it like a culture of like negativity at the start too, because then you're gonna get your first comp or like whatever, and you're gonna get beaten pretty badly, which is kind of what happened to us. I think there was kind of like a lot of like shit talking about the class, sort of negative talking about the class. But you really want to like, you only have a few months of this, so you really want to like be talking positively about it and kind of really put your all into it. Like what Sophia said about like you only got one chance. Actually make the most of that, and while you're in it, like have at least pretend to be interested, and like you will be interested eventually. But at the start, kind of have like an open mind and be very positive, because if you do that, that's how you're honestly gonna end up like winning, and it's gonna show if there's like a culture of negativity in the class.
Great, thanks everyone. Are there any other questions students might have had they want to ask the incoming students? Speak now. Peace. Okay.
Very scary, I promise. If you can ask questions. We don't bite, I swear.
Oh, we got another question. Yay. Okay. Did each of the volunteers come into the program with a large understanding of these topics already?
No.
Oh.
No.
Actually, so I was in Unit 2, and I want to say the vast majority of my US history, government, we the people, Unit 2 knowledge came from the Hamilton musical. So I think I had an A+ last year. So if you don't have like a really solid like educational foundation going into We the People, it's absolutely okay.
Yeah, I think Unit 2 especially is a weird little mix of like framers and modern day history or modern day, but I think all you really need is a curiosity to be willing to learn and to research really weird niche documents and I don't know, read up on the news and catch up throughout the summer. But I don't think any of us were really knowledgeable in any of our units because we had no idea where we'd end up. So it's okay if you don't know all of the framers. You'll learn.
Yeah, and it might seem really daunting right now. Like with our school, we had like a meeting towards the end of the year where we had a team from a unit from last year give like another like sample testimony, and I remember watching it and being terrified. Like I did not think I would ever be able to reach the level that they did, and I didn't even know what was coming out of their mouth. They were a unit two also. I'm a unit two. I had no idea what was coming out of their mouth. I was like, oh my God, I'm never gonna be able to do this. But now at the point where I do understand, you get there eventually. You think it's gonna be really like scary, and it is, but your coaches will walk you through it. They'll be there every step of the way, and you will eventually know the information.
Yeah, and I think it's also not, I think you grow throughout the year. It's not you walk into the class and after 2 months you know everything. I think our first competition was at the start of December for Foothill, and I think we grew a lot from December to April for the national competition. I think like it's not necessarily what you learn at the start of the year or what you learn from the textbook that like fuels your experience. I think it's just continually researching and continually practicing throughout the year that actually builds that knowledge and builds those skills. I think probably every week we got better. Like every couple weeks, our coach, Mr. McBride, would look at us and say, you know, that was your best performance so far. But that kept happening throughout the year because we were always, you know, doing more research, doing more practice, learning more about each other. And so I think it's sort of a natural progression that you'll learn a lot more over time, and especially during the hopefully, knock on wood, that you guys get to nationals, but you'll learn a ton during those last couple months before you fly to DC, hopefully.
Kind of shifting gears, I think although all these knowledge components are a lot of things that you're going to probably learn and kind of adapt to while you're researching, I think a couple of things that are important going into the class with are just kind of skills. And those skills can be like understanding like how to differentiate between good sources versus fraudulent sources, knowing how to kind of get in all of your information and kind of look at a lot of different resources and kind of pick and choose what kind of information is going to be the most condensed and the most suitable to however you learn, whether that's through like reading articles, reading books, watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, kind of honing in on all of those kind of research skills and practical writing techniques and everything. Those are a couple of skills that I think like we necessarily did not practice that much in We the People. That was just like different things that we kind of knew from beforehand, whether or not it was kind of doing research for classes and whatnot prior. But I think like you will definitely be using those skills and ultimately you will get better at it. I know I got way better at like getting through all the Google mess, because sometimes, you know, when you ask Google a really hard question and it won't give you the little cute box at the top and it'll give you like a bunch of random websites. Like I got really good at being able to sift through those websites and get what I wanted really quickly. And so those are kind of things that you'll learn from this class, but you probably already have a really good foundation in whether or not from things that you've done prior.
Yeah, I don't know how you can be like know like everything you need to know for this class, because at least for like unit 3, like there's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff that there's no real way to like know that, I think, at this age, other than to like be in We the People, like unless you somehow know about like all these cases or like all these concepts. Like I don't know where you'd know that from. I think you just got to know how to like show up on time and honestly just like take the class to heart, and you'll be fine if you have that.
All right, we've got some other questions rolling in. So this question is from an incoming student. How did you get along or get close to your group mates, and how did you solve any disputes that came up?
Okay, so Unit 3, I didn't know Owen or Renab at the beginning of the year. Like I knew vaguely, actually I did not know Owen. I had no idea who he was. I've never seen him before. But like we got to know each other because we spent so much time together. And one of the things that we always made sure we do is like we sat around and we just chit chat. Like you don't have to be doing some super fun activity, but if you get to know each other as human beings, it's so much easier to work with each other. Like if you like them as a human being, because on some degree, everybody can get along. Like you can always compromise and you can always get along with people if you know them. So you have to talk to them and you have to gossip a little bit and you have to chit chat a little bit. And maybe you accidentally spend your entire meeting chit-chatting, but that's okay because in the end it works out. Like you have to have that relationship before and while you are studying. So sit around and talk to each other is my advice.
Yeah, adding on to Sophia's point, I think for us it was planning stuff outside of school too. Like obviously we'd have time in class to work with each other, but for us, especially at the start of the year, we'd plan little hangouts at someone's house, or we'd go on little Trader Joe's runs to get snacks for our meetings. And I think those were where I really like grew the most comfortable with them. You'll have some of those experiences like at the state competition too, where you're like sharing a hotel room with some of your unit mates, and those go a long way. But I think for us, it was making sure to plan stuff outside of school just to get to know each other, especially at the start of the year.
Yeah, I want to say from Unit 2, we had a lot of disagreements with each other just because we're all very, very different people. Like, I think one of the pinnacle moments of us as a Unit 2 was me sitting on one end of the table and then my unit mate Siddharth sitting on the other end. And everything that he would say, I would just say I disagree with him, even if I agree with him, because it just turned into our thing. I think it's good to have disagreements and it's good to have arguments. Like there are times where we've like raised voices at each other. We've like got into like a big screaming match with each other in the library. And then we like ended up rolling around on the floor. So if you don't have arguments or disagreements with each other, that's kind of so it should happen. But I also want to say what you put into We the People and your relationship with the people around you is exactly what you get out of it. Because you choose how close you want to be with them. There are some units that I talk to and they're like, oh yeah, we just don't talk at all. But then there are units like mine where like we're like besties and we like share trauma with each other. We just talk about our day. And I'm so comfortable acting like borderline psychotic around these people because I know that at the end of the day, they have my back and I have theirs too. And this doesn't even have to be in your unit too. It's like within your team. You'll like end up interacting and liking people that you never thought you would. So put in effort into your relationship and I promise you that you will get the same amount out of them because we have a joke where it's like these people are going to be with me at my wedding, but they're also going to be with me at my divorce trial because we're just like that.
All right. The next question: how did CACE volunteers help you prepare for your competitions?
I can answer this. I think one of the best ways like CASE was able to help us was through Discord. I know my unit specifically, we sent a lot of kind of like conceptual questions and just like practical things towards CASE on the Discord. We would basically being like, oh, so we have like this umbrella question, this sub question 1, this sub question 2. You guys can see like how that's broken down in your session materials for your regionals and district questions, but sometimes we would kind of like send that to CASE and then we would be like, oh, so we wanted to format like our 9 paragraphs in this way. We were wondering if like there's anything that we should change in terms of being able to kind of cater more information to that. CASE is really helpful in terms of like picking out what evidence would be better than the other. Sometimes we would send in sample questions. For example, like we would get a question during a practice round and then we might not know how to answer it, so we would take notes on it, but then we would kind of prepare it. We would send the question and our potential answer to CASE just to kind of see if we were answering it in the right way, just to kind of make sure multiple perspectives got in on it. CASE was super, super helpful in kind of making sure that we had a stable foundation, and I think that's the way we access CASE the most.
Yeah, I think my unit also used Discord a couple times. I think one instance that it was really helpful was deciding like what parts of our testimony like jumped out at the judges the most. So we once sent a part of our testimony to the Discord and we asked like, oh, like what, like if you were to listen to this or read this, like what part of this would interest you the most? What would you ask questions about? They can't send you direct questions because that's kind of like unfair, but they can say like, okay, well, this specific thing that you brought up, like I would ask a follow-up question about it because like it jumps out at me. So I think you can then prepare your question or you prepare your evidence and prepare your answers for those. And I think that's really helpful also.
Yeah, I think those kinds of feedback is really, that kind of feedback is really helpful because the CASE volunteers are going to be the same judges you have. So like your coaches are never going to judge you in actual competition. And so their feedback, they can only speculate. But like we had both Sabrina and Clint, not my unit, but other units had both Sabrina and Clint, and maybe 1 or 2 other CASE volunteers. as our judges at the state competition. And so by getting their feedback in advance, that's a lot more valuable because it's the same mind and sort of the same types of questions that they'll be asking you in real competition. So I think that was particularly helpful for us.
They're also just like CACE people are just like quite experienced with law stuff in particular. Back in October or so, like a couple of weeks before regionals, we had this kind of interesting opinion in our testimony about how executive power works and evolves over time. It was really cool. It was like a great question to think about. But at a CACE session, like on a Sunday just like this, we did a practice with Clint Woods himself, and he informed us that we were citing a war criminal. So that was really fun. There's a lot of things like that. It's just like the little problems in our testimony that like might be little things that no one notices, might end up being like huge things that we mess up at state, and it's kind of useful to get that like second set of eyes.
Also adding on, I think for me, the most important thing that CACE could provide for us was like helping out at dress rehearsals. So you'll do like a practice run right before competition. And there, one, it's helpful to kind of get into the competition mindset and like run through your testimonies, have a practice Q&A where you feel like the pressure of competition without actually having the stakes. And I think just getting a different set of eyes and different set of opinions on your testimony right before you perform can just like help calm your nerves and just make you feel really prepared.
Okay, great. And I got a follow-up question about CACE Discord, which I will take. How do you join CACE Discord? Well, we have the way it's structured, and we're not setting up the CACE Discord for the incoming students until the school year starts and you get assigned to your unit. So don't worry, you're not missing anything yet. It's not even set up yet for you. We will let you and your teachers know when that gets set up. If your school allows for it, to the extent you're working on school computers, they might not. We are still available over email, so you can kind of ask the same kinds of questions. But for those who are able to join by Discord, we will have a school channel set up for you where everyone in your school can access it. There's also a channel that's set up where every student can access it across all the schools. And that's oftentimes where CACE volunteers will say, hey, there's this new cool news article, have it here. And that is mostly us providing information to you all rather than discussion. But if you have quick questions about your own unit, you would go into your school's unit. So at a future time, we will share all that information with your teachers and all of you to be able to join it. But again, we will also be available via email if we can't set up your school that way. Okay, let's do one last question we have, and it is, following the competition, what did you end up shifting your efforts to after you had all that free time?
Sleep.
Hamilton. That was fun.
We played what's the Hitler game?
Oh.
Remember? It's like the board game. We're not Owen, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Secret Hitler. It's a really fun spy, like lying board game. Yeah. I think like after state though, I can talk about that. I remember we came back and we had a macro test and it was the worst day ever. Like half of us on the team skipped and then the other half came and we all like averaged like a 40%. Not to scare you, macro, like I'm a macro hater. Everyone knows that about me. But yeah, when you come back from competition, like especially for nationals, because for nationals, at least amateur, you missed like 4 to 5 days of school. You come back and it's like punches after punches of just kind of getting back, just because it's like if you are enrolled in other AP classes, you take your AP finals that week, you come back because you have to get them all done before your AP testing, and so like you have to deal with that. After states, you kind of go back to your normal routine, but it's just like kind of catching up because you've just spent all of January like pretending that none of your other classes exist, even though they do very much exist and you've been putting them on the back burner, but now that's coming back to bite you. So you kind of have to pay attention to the world outside. We the people are comp civics, and it's a little sad sometimes, but you know, it's happiness and joy.
Maybe a more serious answer. I think the knowledge from We the People also helped. Like we took most of our team took the AP Gov test after the class, and I don't want to like speculate, but I'd guess that everyone who took the class and put work into it got a 5 without with minor studying or a little bit of review before the test. Because you go so much deeper into the material, it makes a lot of other classes and tests a lot easier. And I think any of us who take like a political science or like government class in college are just going to breeze through it because we already have a much deeper understanding in our brains.
Yeah, AP Gov is going to be a lot easier because of Comp Civics, and it's kind of vice versa too, I think. Like, somewhat, Comp Civics is easier because of AP Gov, at least in Amador. But yeah, like after you get back from competition, one piece of advice, if you're on Amador and maybe Foothill, I don't know how long you did it, but after states, like we got a really, really long break and we watched like Argo, and then I think we just like did random stuff after states. So it's maybe good to like kind of work with your unit and like you can give yourself like a week, but after that week ends, you should probably get back to working after that. Because I think it kind of just got too long and it felt like people didn't really care afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, after like whether you're going to nationals or not, like when your season ends, it's like the last few months of your senior year. You're not going to be doing all that much. Senioritis hits hard. We specifically after nationals in the like month and a half before school ended, we did a lot of like movie time and just like game time. We like there's some like preparing for college because like you probably know where you're going to go by then. We did a lot of like preparing stuff for next year as well, like making resources for next year. I don't know, it's just fun times because like it's a class with for us 28 of your best friends, and it's great.
Hey, and thank you. I'd like to again thank you all for joining us today and putting in the work for this presentation. We really appreciate your time. Hopefully everyone in the chat can give a little clapping emoji as thanks. So thank you so much, and we look forward to having you as volunteers for the rest of the year too as we go into practices. So with that, we are going to move on to our next part, which is a score sheet breakdown. As I mentioned, we're going to cover about half the items in the score sheet today, and so it's going to be analysis understanding category, the application, and discussion category. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Katie to present. And Katie, would you like me to screen share for you?
Yes, please. I hate navigating screen share, so that is a huge help. So. Alrighty, so this is a competition, and when we do a competition, we get scored. So we're going to talk about a couple of the components of the score sheet today, which will be interesting to kind of think through. This is a scoring guide, so it kind of breaks down what the category is all about, kind of what the focus is. And then over on the side is some of the criteria. I think we'll probably show you the actual score sheet as well, but we'll start with this. This is a pretty helpful resource for taking a look at like, what does this mean? So today we're going to be focusing on the last three elements of the score sheet. Scoring for We the People changed last year. So this is a relatively new setup, a kind of different way that we do scoring. It's not so different, but it's a little different. So yeah, we're some of your judges and stuff are adjusting to a new kind of format. So yeah, so there's 5 categories now in the new version. The opening statement's its own. We'll talk about that more, I think, at a later summer session. Evidence is its own category, which I think we'll also talk about more at a later discussion. But what we're going to talk about today are analysis/understanding, application, and discussion. So we'll start with analysis/understanding. So this is really about showing your knowledge and showing that you get the core topics, or kind of taking a look at kind of the key and core concepts to the issue that you are discussing. Right. So as we talked about, there's the 6 units. All of them have a little bit of a different focus. So it's really important as a unit to make sure that you feel fully secure in your kind of core knowledge base for your unit and for whatever question you're getting asked. As Nathan talked about, right, there's kind of 3 components to the question. There's an overall kind of part, and then there's 2 kind of sub questions. Now, you need to answer all of them, but those questions are a good way of kind of getting a sense of what some of the core topics that are being discussed are, and feeling confident in that is really important to analysis and understanding. So to score well in this category, which is out of 10 points in this category, so your judges are, will be putting down a number to this. But to score well in this category, you are referencing kind of key judicial decisions, amendments to the Constitution. You're giving historical context and kind of pulling out like important moments in history. You're pulling out, kind of information about society and social movements, and you're describing the impact on, kind of the Constitution's meaning, and how the Constitution is applied to those topics. It's also really important in this to, have recognize multiple perspectives, right? The reason why we do We the People is that this stuff is complex. It is, I would say, in many ways, not settled. People have many different perspectives on this. People that agree, like overall, with the same kind of endpoint of like where we should be or where, how we should apply the Constitution, have different perspectives about how we get there. And people also have very, very different perspectives about like what the end goal should be. So in order to do well in this, in this kind of topic and in this competition, it's really important to look at a kind of a variety of different perspectives. And even if you don't agree with them, being able to kind of clearly articulate some of those different perspectives and different understandings. So, for example, right, like in a case, understanding the way that the judges come down in the majority and in the opinion is important, but also like dissenting opinions are really interesting, right? The people that did not agree, what are the arguments against that perspective? So taking a look at that. And so, looking at arguments by scholars, by people, by judges, by other people in the world. And then the last kind of part here on the scoring criteria is potential consequences of various interpretations. So that's, I think, a little bit of the analysis piece. It's like, hey, we have this constitutional concept, we have these kind of court cases, but like ultimately, what does it mean? If we follow these arguments, if we look at the way that we're understanding this, what impact does that have with like how we understand the past, how we understand the present, and how we move for the future? Oftentimes in these classes, we are in this competition, I think a really kind of common type of judge question is applying some of those logics to different moments in history or different kinds of concepts, comparing and contrasting between the past and the present, asking like, okay, if we hold this to be true, if this is like the argument we're taking, like, what does that mean for the future? And so being able to think through all that is really important for analysis. Does that make sense? Do we have questions so far? Feel free to pop in anytime. I'm happy to help clarify things too. But this is a really good sheet to be looking at. Okay, I'll move on towards application, but if anything comes up, let me know. So application is about how we're using this in real life, right? So that kind of, it's always tricky with, I think with the score sheet, there's definitely things that touch on multiple of these things, right? Things that are, it's not all like hard lined away from each other. I don't feel, especially I think with the new score sheet, there's a little bit more of kind of mixed areas here. But yeah, we're talking about how we evaluate it today. So, what's happening in the court, what's happening in the world, how do we use the Constitution to solve problems we face in the world? A really great thing that I love it when units do is looking at other places, right? So this is a class that's very much focused on the American Constitution, but hey, there's a broader context to this world. So if we're looking at how other countries structure their governments, that's a way that we can understand things, right? Kind of provide an alternative perspective on how we do things, here in this country, right? There's, very much, a focus on the United States, but I think it's really important to remember that we can understand that and approach that topic from a couple different angles. So to do well on application, we are addressing how constitutional issues are assessed, right? So what are the legal frameworks? What are the court interpretations? What are public policies and prevailing arguments? How are we talking about this? How do we understand this? What does that look like? We're looking at constitutional provisions and principles applied to real world situations, policies, debates, or contemporary issues. So some of that, right? As the alumni talked about, it's really important to be following what's going on in the world. It's always a lot when we're doing We the People during election years, during moments where there's a lot going on. 2024 has had a lot of news in the space of constitutional issues between recent Supreme Court decisions, things going on in the world. Being plugged in really helps. So you're going to want to be studying all your core topics. You're going to want to be looking at history, but you're also going to be wanting to keep up on the news in the present. I can remember sometimes with some competitions where something big happened very shortly before the competition, and it's really important to know what's going on in the world, because your judges are people just like you are too. So when something big is happening in the world, it's probably top of their mind, and they're probably going to ask you about it, and ask you to apply your thoughts and opinions and ideas onto that. And then, as we're talking about there, familiarity with constitutional principles and frameworks from other countries or historical time periods, and using kind of comparative perspectives to enrich their analysis. So that's always great to do, kind of putting things into conversation with each other, taking a look at different ways that people have understood that same kind of core concept in different places, in different times, and using that to build a deeper and stronger kind of application of these principles to different things. So, paying attention to the broader context in which we exist. As Kamala Harris said, we didn't fall out of a coconut tree. So that's where application is there. Does that make sense? Any questions there on that topic? Fantastic. Alrighty. And then discussion. So as you saw from how the alumni did their presentation, the format of this program is to have that kind of prepared statement, and then there's open Q&A. And that open Q&A is really a time to kind of shine. It can be challenging. It can be really stressful. I remember the first time that I experienced Q&A. It was a lot, but it's also a really cool opportunity. And discussion, as a scoring component, is looking at kind of how you use that time. So it's a little bit less content focused, and more about the way in which you're performing during that time. So a good discussion is one where we are using, reasoning and evidence in our answers to back up what we're saying. We're not just like throwing something out there, we're backing it up. There's a separate evidence category, but that's covered here too. It's also about how we interact with our group, right? Are we fully engaged with what our unit mates are saying, or are we too focused on exactly what we're going to say instead? So we want to make sure that we're listening to each other, that we're referring and bouncing off of each other. A really kind of common thing that we do, or units can do to help kind of build a good discussion, build an interesting discussion where we're looking at a lot of different perspective, different kind of things in conversation with each other, is to have moments of agreement and moments of disagreement, right? I think we saw that really well in the alumni panel, moments where it's like, hey, I understand that my unit mate presented this perspective, but here is a different perspective, and here's the evidence I have to back it up. And that builds a fuller, richer perspective, which also boosts your, understanding, boosts the application, because you're building on each other. You are going to want to, kind of have this key, just like show your ability to have a good discussion. So you also want to have balanced engagement. I know sometimes, right, people are shy. It can be hard and intimidating to jump in. I promise though, I think I felt a lot as a student that like the judges were so amazing and impressive, and like they really are. Like there's cool and interesting people that are judging you, but they're also people, and many of them have been in that same seat. So please don't be scared. We don't bite, and we are here and interested in your success and interested in your learning. So we want to hear from all of you. We want to have kind of shared perspectives across the board. We have better discussion when we're thoughtful about how we participate. I am a yapper. And so being thoughtful about like, you know, when I was a student, being thoughtful about not taking up too much space, you know, taking a moment of a breath or a pause after a question is answered, a question is asked, to let another student kind of jump in and start sharing their perspective before I come in can help build that more balanced conversation. Likewise, people that are quieter, people that take a little bit more time to think, you know, challenging yourself to come in earlier to, you know, help build that perspective is really good. I always use this. I'm not a sports person, but this is like a thing that I think about, is like in volleyball, right? The person who starts the answer might just be setting up someone else's shot, but that's equally important in this kind of thing. The ideal situation is that we have kind of initial answer, something that builds on that, something that builds on that. And in that time, we're not doing repetition. We're not, you know, kind of wasting the space. Q&A is short. And so we want to be thoughtful and snappy about how we participate. That's something that you won't have immediately. It's something that comes with time. But you know, in time you can get there too. And then, yeah, the next kind of bullet point: logical and well-supported reasoning, relevant evidence, constitutional principles, and legal precedents. And then linking up to your opening statement, fully further elaborating on arguments presented in their initial remarks. Now, I think I would advise to be a little careful on this, on the evidence front. It's good to leave room in your opening statement to have like room to build things in Q&A. You don't want to say everything up top that you would then be, you know, just repeating yourself later on. Using a diversity of evidence to me is always more impressive and you know, more important. And I always appreciate it when people can like build on an argument or something that they said in their opening statement without just rephrasing it and saying it again, by introducing some different evidence or introducing, you know, some additional kind of context. You know, again, it's a short period of time for those, so we want to make sure that we're using it to the best of our ability. So yeah, those are those categories of the score sheet. Awesome.
Thank you, Katie. So do we have any follow-up questions about that?
Yeah. Or any thoughts from any other judges on anything that I might have missed?
Hearing none or seeing none, we are gonna head off to a break. All right, welcome back, everyone. So, up next, as I previewed before, we have the Great Debate. And this is the Great Debate where three of our CACE volunteers will be each representing a branch of the federal government. And it's up to you to decide what is the most powerful branch of government. So the way this is going to work is the three of us will each represent a different branch. We will spend some time discussing why we think that's the case based off of certain questions. And then we will open it up to a question and answer period where you get to ask us questions to help defend our positions. After that, we're going to go into a breakout room and you all will discuss what you think is the correct answer. We're going to come back after that and have a vote so we can see once and for all what is the definitive answer to this question. Before we get started, let's have each of us introduce who we are and what we are advocating for. So as I mentioned before at the top, I'm Sabrina, and I will be advocating for the president being the most powerful branch of government, the executive. Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning, almost afternoon. My name is Sean Gentry. I'm a volunteer. I've been volunteering with the schools and CACE since 2007, and specifically with CACE for about 10 years. I've been on the board for two-thirds of that time. I'm an attorney in San Francisco, and I practice employment law. Previously was in the program in 2002. at Foothill, and I did Unit 1, and I still have a soft spot in my heart for Unit 1. I will be presenting on the legislative branch.
Well, my name is Clint Woods, and I will be making the thoroughly correct and powerful argument that the judiciary is the most powerful branch of the federal government.
Great, Sean, take it away.
All right. So we're going to do this in 3 parts. We're going to rotate through. The first section we are going to talk about is what were the founders' views? So who did the founders think was the most powerful branch of government? And to this, I say it's unequivocally clear that the founders believed that the legislative branch was the most powerful. And why is that? Because they told us that. They were talking about how concerned they were with the legislative branch having so much power at the time of our framing. And that is in part why we have the Bill of Rights in the first place. But why is it powerful? It's because the Articles of Confederation were so weak to begin with. So prior to the ratification of our US Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation. It lacked taxing authority. It lacked power over interstate commerce. There was really no centralized power in a federal government. And a lack of federal legislative supremacy. In particular, they were having a lot of trouble enforcing laws against the states. And so they went the opposite direction with the Constitution, and it is, in fact, what the framers were most familiar with, legislative bodies like the Virginia House of Burgesses. And it was what they were basically the type of legislative body that they had during the Revolutionary War in Philadelphia. And so they were very familiar with it, and they granted the legislative branch significant powers in the Constitution in Article 1, which is the longest section of the Constitution, encompassing more than half of the total words in our document. And these words primarily grant powers and rights to Congress, including over the states. All of the articles of the Constitution, all of the branches, really only have the powers that are granted to them in the Constitution. And the legislative branch has the most. So let's start with Article 1, Powers of the Purse, which is Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. We sometimes call this the Appropriations Clause. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 is the Taxing and Spending Clause, right? So the legislative branch, particularly the House, have the ability to levy taxes, raise revenue, and spend it in whatever way they deem fit to fund, the Navy, the Army, the bureaucracy, the courts, you name it, that it all derives from Congress, right? And then they have power over the states with those spending powers and all the other powers because of the Supremacy Clause in Article 6. So Article 6, Clause 2 says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. I'm paraphrasing, it's much longer than that. But it basically says we have power over the states for all of the things that we occupy the field on. Some of the powers also included in Article 1, Section 8 are the power to declare war, to raise and support armies, to provide and maintain a navy, to make the rules for government and regulation, to provide for calling forth a militia, which is a little outdated, admittedly, at this point, et cetera, et cetera. There are quite a few rules there in Section 8, or Section 8. In addition, there are 2 very powerful grants of, legislative power in Article 1. So the first one is the Necessary and Proper Clause, which we sometimes call the Elastic Clause. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, and says that Congress has the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution all the other powers in the Constitution. Madison, in particular, in Federalist 51, pointed out that in a Republican government, legislative authority necessarily predominates, meaning they are the most powerful branch. Their authority must be the most dominant of the 3 branches. And in fact, the Anti-Federalists in Brutus 1, which was probably Robert Yates, talked about how concerned they were with this necessary and proper clause being so sort of nebulous and power granting for the legislature to kind of do whatever it wanted. And they were concerned that it would eliminate any sovereignty or autonomy left to the states. Hamilton in Federalist 33 said this is simply a truism, that the necessary proper clause is required to run a government, and that it would give significant power to the legislative branch. And Madison chimed in as well in Federalist 44, supporting this position. Patrick Henry weighed in. Everyone was, concerned about how powerful this clause was, and it has proven to be true over time. The other very powerful clause given to Congress is the Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, to regulate commerce with foreign nations among the several states and the Native American, although at that time they said Indian tribes. And that particular clause has also expanded significantly over time. We can look back at 1942 with Wickard versus Filburn, which really opened the floodgates on Congress utilizing the necessary and proper clause. And we've seen this in other situations more recently. Sometimes the courts will comment about how Congress is allowed to use the necessary and proper clause, for example, to pass Obamacare, which is the legislative bill, essentially. And they also have power over the other branches of government. So very quickly, and then I'll pass the torch here. They have some power to control the courts, right? The court is not just the Supreme Court, it's also the lower courts. And in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9, the Congress has the power to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, basically funding them, defunding them, deciding how many judges are on each court, et cetera, et cetera. And then as to the executive, they have a lot of power to stymie or oversee the executive branch. They can defund different bureaucratic groups or cabinet positions. They can essentially approve or not approve Supreme Court or other judicial appointments with the advice and consent clause. And there are a number of ways that they act as a check on the executive. And with that, I will pass the torch. I think we decide Sabrina will go next.
Very, very interesting, Sean. I disagree that.
You would.
And here's a little bit why. Of all the branches of government, the framers didn't allow powers to be vested in just one person. Well, except for the executive. In Federalist 70, Alexander Hamilton argued for a strong executive leader, directly as a result of how weak the executive was under the Articles of Confederation. He said, taking it for granted, therefore, that all men of sense will agree in the necessity of an energetic executive, it will only remain to inquire what are the ingredients which constitute this energy. How far can they be combined with those other ingredients which constitute safety in the Republican sense? America had just survived the Revolution and the Articles of Confederation and the Shays' Rebellion, which showed folly in not having a centralized power to raise taxes or an army. In the Virginia plan presented, the executive was a single person, chosen by the national legislature with considerable power, who, along with the judiciary, would have some veto power over the legislator. However, the New Jersey plan was an executive of multiple people. They were going to be elected by Congress, could not be reelected, and could be recalled by Congress when requested by the majority of executives in the states. But the framers were so concerned with limiting the scope of power of the legislature that they simply ran out of time to finish the Article 2 of the Constitution about the executive. The resulting Article 2 of the Constitution, in James Madison's delicate phrase, was not exempt from a degree of the hurrying influence produced by fatigue and impatience. Thomas Jefferson in Paris during the convention was more direct. It was, he sputtered, a bad edition of a Polish king. The executive was therefore granted by the founders with many hats that control every aspect of government and did legislative and judiciary-like activities in addition to the executive. He is the commander-in-chief, the person in charge of emergency powers. He can issue legislative-like executive orders. He can pardon people for crimes, negotiate treaties, veto legislation, and appoint the judiciary. The founders trusted that those powers would go checked by the other branches of government, but that has not borne out in history. Congress has crafted broad legislation to allow the president to do many things, including effectively wielding war under the War Powers Act without real congressional consent. Although Congress has the power of impeachment, those efforts have failed, even in light of potential allegations of coup led by a president. And the judiciary is willing to grant the president powers and discretion, especially in the context of foreign policy. And most recently, we have seen the judiciary willing to give the president leave to do virtually anything by granting him criminal immunity for undefined official acts in Trump v. United States. As Hamilton said, energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. With only a few limits, whatever the president wants, the executive branch delivers. The actual text of Article 2 is somewhat ambiguous, which is a flaw that has been exploited by the president since nearly the beginning of the nation. And that's why, as Hamilton desired, the executive branch is the most powerful branch of government today. With that, I will hand it over to
Interesting arguments. Unfortunately, incorrect, ultimately. So, as we heard my colleague, Mr. Gentry, mention a long list of things that are in the Constitution in Article 1, those are primarily lists of things that Congress cannot do or must do. Either way, they are constraining Congress. And then we heard my colleague, Ms. McGraw, mention the somewhat shorter list of things that the president can do or must do. There aren't very many things that the president can do or must do. And then in Article 3, then you get to Article 3, which lays out the courts. And it, my friends, is the shortest of the substantive articles. There isn't a whole lot there. And what that does is it creates a vacuum that the Supreme Court has used to infuse with its own power. In doing so, it has taken a look at Article 1 and all of the things that Congress can and can't do, and it has drawn a box around what Congress can do by using the power of judicial review. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. And then it has drawn a box around the powers of the president. We're going to be talking a lot about some recent decisions about the powers of the president. There's a very good one, or a very interesting one, Trump versus the United States, which just came out about presidential immunity. What my colleague did not mention is another case called Loper-Bright v. Raimondo, where the Supreme Court said, you know, all those executive agencies that make up the bulk of the executive branch, well, they're not going to work well anymore because we have decided the powers of the other branches. As much as the founders had some good ideas, what they really didn't do was specify what they thought the Supreme Court would do. As much as the president was sort of an afterthought, well, the Supreme Court was even more of an afterthought. And what the original idea was that there was going to be something like a council of revision, which was within the legislative branch, which issued sort of advisory opinions. And then at the end, they were like, you know what, let's just put a Supreme Court out there, and we're going to make sure that these people are politically insulated. Whereas Congress gets elected every 2 years, the president gets elected every 4 years. We're going to make sure that these people get elected or appointed once. There is no mechanism for individuals to vote for these people, and they serve for life for good behavior. What does good behavior mean? Well, theoretically, Congress could decide to impeach, but they never do. They only, in fact, impeached one Supreme Court justice. That was Samuel Chase in 1804. His nickname was Old Bacon Face. And I just mentioned that because it's very funny. Anyway, because Congress can never do anything whatsoever, they didn't actually convict him. And so Old Bacon Face was Old Bacon facing over the Supreme Court until he retired. And so the idea of how long Supreme Court justices serve or federal judges serve is basically they serve as long as they want. And people cannot vote them out of office ever, ever, ever. There are a few checks on the Supreme Court. Most of them are self-imposed. The ones that aren't, my colleague Mr. Gentry mentioned that Congress can set the appellate jurisdiction, can constitute courts that are inferior to the Supreme Court. That's all very nice and well and good. Theoretically, Congress could strip the Supreme Court and other courts of appellate jurisdiction, to hear certain types of cases. Do they ever really do that? No, they don't, because they're Congress. The other checks on the Supreme Court, those are mostly self-imposed by the judiciary because the judiciary interprets the Constitution. There's the cases and controversies requirement, which basically in Article 3, which says that that the Supreme Court can only hear active cases and controversies, not things that are unripe or moot in other ways. who decides whether a case is ripe or moot? Well, it's the court, so they can decide whether somebody has standing or doesn't have standing, or they could ignore standing whatsoever. I can give you some examples of that. Their compensation cannot be changed by Congress, and they are appointed by the executive, confirmed by the Senate. But again, once they're in for life. Alexander Hamilton, star of stage and screen, he argued in Federalist 78 that, as my colleagues sort of previewed, he argued that, hey, the judicial branch is the least powerful branch. They have neither force nor will. Well, that's really good for Alexander Hamilton, but he was really, really wrong about that, and wrong about a number of different things. He also said in Federalist 78, while talking about the courts, and I think this is important because judicial review is the big check that each one of these branches has on the other two, excuse me. It is the most powerful check. It is the super evolved Pokemon. I'm not a Pokemon person, but whatever the most evolved one is, I don't know. It's the one that is the best, that wins in the end every time. And, some people say, well, judicial review didn't exist until Marbury versus Madison, 1803. I think that's wrong, because if you read Federalist 78, which was written in 17, I don't know, whenever it was written, it was written 20 years before that. And it says, and I quote, whenever a particular statute contravenes the Constitution, it will be the duty of the judicial tribunals to adhere to the latter and disregard the former, meaning to adhere to the Constitution and disregard the statute. That is a description of judicial review. Let's see. So that check of judicial review has been wielded so many times over actions taken by the president, over actions taken by Congress. And after judicial review is used, there's almost nothing that can change it. Once the Supreme Court makes up its mind, you can, of course, pass a constitutional amendment. Super hard to do. Almost never happens. Sometimes you can pass a statute. That almost never happens because, again, Congress can't do anything. And then, once the Supreme Court says you can't do something to the president, usually, not always, usually the president follows that. And so, in the end of the day, the Supreme Court is sitting there with this most powerful check that it uses all the time. And the only checks that are really effective against the power of the Supreme Court are generally self-imposed. So with that, I will turn it over to whoever is next on the next question of who is most powerful in protecting individual rights. And I'm gonna be really interested to hear how the other two are gonna even come close to judiciary.
Settle down. Okay. Interesting. I have some feelings, but let's start out. And just to clarify, the next question is what branch has the ability to protect individual rights best? So, in that regard, I think the executive clearly comes out on front. President Obama once said, as president, I have no greater responsibility than protecting the American people. The president takes an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, which includes the individual rights enumerated in the document. In the 1960s and 70s, for example, U.S. presidents showed their commitment to international human rights by the executive signing, not by the legislative ratifying, several major human rights treaties, including the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. In fact, during the Carter administration, respect for human rights even played a role in determining foreign policy. One of the powers of the president has used to protect individual rights is the executive order. For example, here are some executive orders on human rights throughout U.S. history. President Obama provided workplace protections for LGBTQ workers in EO Executive Order 13672, Executive Order 13107 by President Clinton implemented human rights treaties. Of course, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Truman desegregated the military in Executive Order 9981. In 1957, Eisenhower Executive Order 10730 federalized the National Guard to desegregate schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I will note that was following Supreme Court decision, which didn't do anything by itself. It required the president to actually enforce it. And in 1961, Kennedy established the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity in Executive Order 10925. Additionally, presidents have exercised deferred action, or a choice not to use enforcement powers to further individual rights, like President Obama's easing enforcement of federal marijuana laws, or the deferred action for childhood arrivals with the DACA policy. The power to determine when and how laws are applied makes the president singularly powerful in protecting and furthering individual rights. Now, I anticipate my colleague Clint raising all of the many decisions by Supreme Court justices affecting individual rights. But what he probably will not mention is that the president is the one that appointed all of those justices. And he is singularly responsible for the legacy of the Supreme Court many years after the 4-year or 8-year term. This most recent year and decisions shows just how powerful the president is in shaping who is on the Supreme Court and what that Supreme Court decides. For example, in the last couple of years, there's been an overturning of abortion rights, overturning Roe v. Wade in the decision Dobbs v. Jackson, granting unparalleled deference to religious rights, including in Creative LLC v. Ellenis on the website against same-sex marriage, and getting rid of affirmative action in Students for Fair Admission versus the president. You'll say that all of those maybe take away individual rights, but the question here is the ability to protect individual rights. And that means that the president is singularly there to protect or shape the Supreme Court that may not. And with that, I think the president is the singularly most responsible for affecting individual rights among all the branches. Thank you.
Well, yes, I am going to mention a lot of cases that affect individual rights. As somebody in the chat mentioned, it's kind of simple, but Brown v. Board redefined equality under the Constitution. Sure did. And that was, while it's true, the president does appoint all of these Supreme Court members, but once they're appointed, oftentimes they make decisions that the president certainly didn't anticipate or didn't want. There's a long list of Supreme Court members who were appointed by a member of one party, and they ended up being they were appointed to be conservative. They ended up being liberal, vice versa. One of the things that I anticipate my colleague Sean is going to mention is that the 14th Amendment is really important about individual rights. Stipulated. Absolutely. It is the best part of the Constitution, in my view. But in addition, it is one of the most powerful vehicles for individual rights in American history. It is the founding of the Equal Protection Clause. It is the second founding of the United States Republic. It's a really big deal. Here's the thing. Who gets to decide what the 14th Amendment means? Spoiler alert, it's the judiciary. And what they did initially was they decided that the 14th Amendment didn't mean a whole lot. They initially gutted the 14th Amendment, even though Congress and the president and the states had gotten together and passed this wonderful amendment to the Constitution. And some of the first cases that came up to the Supreme Court, the civil rights cases, the slaughterhouse cases, the Supreme Court, who was a pretty conservative Supreme Court at the time, said, nope, we're not doing anything about the 14th Amendment because they wielded that power to affect individual rights. Then in the 20s and 30s and 40s, the Supreme Court shifted and it became a little bit more interested in protecting individual rights. And what they did is they did the incorporation doctrine. They created the incorporation doctrine themselves out of whole cloth. There's nothing in the 14th Amendment that says anything about incorporation. It does not say that the Bill of Rights applies to the states. It doesn't say that. The Supreme Court decided that that was what the 14th Amendment was meant to do. And so when they did, eventually, over the process of really about 60 years all in, 60, 70 years all in, maybe 80 now that I'm thinking about it, because math is hard, they incorporated virtually the entire Bill of Rights to the states. I'm going to put a little.
Clint, I think you.
Lynn, I think you hit your space bar and turned on your mute.
Sure did. Hang on one second. Okay, putting a link in the chat to an incorporation chart, which you can take a look at, and that lists all of those cases where the Supreme Court incorporated specific rights in the Bill of Rights to the states. But incorporation is only where it begins, where the power of the Supreme Court to affect individual rights begins, because that's just setting the baseline. That's just saying states can't interfere with that. In addition to the incorporation doctrine, the Supreme Court has gone so much farther. They practically started the Civil War in Dred Scott v. Sanford. And, we talked about a little bit about the 14th Amendment. It wasn't, again, Congress who determined that the 14th Amendment incorporated the Bill of Rights to the states. It was the courts. And it wasn't Congress that limited the executive war powers in Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer. It was the courts. Did Congress desegregate education? No, it was the courts in Brown v. Board, as our commenter mentioned earlier. Did the executive get rid of anti-miscegenation laws? No, that was the courts in Loving v. Virginia. Did Congress establish the right to privacy in Griswold? No, that again was the courts. Can go on. The courts gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in Shelby County v. Holder, 2012. The courts legalized gay marriage in Obergefell. The courts ruled that Title 7 protected the rights of gays and transgender individuals in Bostock. The courts were the ones that created the individual right to bodily autonomy and the individual right to an abortion. And then the courts then stripped that right in Dobbs v. Jackson in 2012. We heard from our student panel earlier about the individual right to bear arms in the Second Amendment. That was created again by the courts in Heller and in Bruin 2022. And then it was changed yet again a month ago in Rahimi. That was the courts determining the boundaries of your individual rights purely by judicial action. And then finally, as Ms. McGraw mentioned earlier about Trump v. the United States and determining the boundaries of what the executive can do in terms of whether they can be held criminally responsible. Once again, the ultimate say is left with the courts, is left with the judiciary, left with the Supreme Court to determine the boundaries of everybody else's power. And when you are the body that gets to determine what everybody else has the power to do, you are ultimately the most powerful body among those three branches.
All right. Very good. So thanks for teeing up the 14th Amendment, but the legislative branch has unique authority to pass the laws that create or allow other branches of government to determine the rights that we have as citizens, right? So almost none of those court cases exist if the Congress had not taken action prior to that to pass an amendment to the Constitution or to create a law that the court was allowed or able to enforce or cast an opinion about. So the 14th Amendment in particular is probably the most important piece of legislation, or I guess it's an amendment, so it's not technically legislation, but legislative act, let's say, that created rights in this country. And so it included the Due Process Clause, which has both a substantive and procedural component. It included the Equal Protection Clause and Privileges and Immunities Clause, which we don't really talk about because I see Clint gesturing, so I'm just going to throw him a bone here, because in the slaughterhouse cases, the court basically said that it only applies to the specific privileges and immunities enumerated in Article 1 of the Constitution, which are admittedly very narrow, and not to what the I think framers, in this case, John Bingham, thought would be the privileges and immunities of citizenship, essentially. But the 14th Amendment has allowed Congress to then subsequently pass a number of laws that have expanded, especially civil rights, but just rights in general in this country, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was passed under the enforcement provisions enumerated at the end of the 14th Amendment. That includes things like Title VII, which is equal protection for individuals in the workplace, among other things, and Title IX, which is equal protections, especially for it was used to expand women's rights in education, especially college education. Cases like Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, expand on the Civil Rights Act or opine on the Civil Rights Act to talk about, where the law prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, as an example. And so all these court cases come out of either the 14th Amendment or other amendments like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, or the laws that Congress was authorized itself to pass subsequently. Another example is the Voting Rights Act, right, which has both have had a rise and fall over the many decades since it was passed. In addition to sort of equal protection or due process laws passed out of the 14th Amendment, there are lots of laws that Congress has just passed over the years that are specifically designed to protect our health, our welfare, our well-being, and our individual rights. So, for example, the Environmental Protection Act exists because corporations or other groups were polluting our rivers, polluting our oceans and our air and whatever else. And so those are congressional acts specifically passed to protect individual rights. And Congress can also change the laws or overturn laws as time passes. They can even overturn judicial court decisions if they determine that the court or the executive branch sort of expanded or exceeded its authority. So, for example, a lot of times in these court cases, the Supreme Court will invite Congress to change the law if it wants to. So we look at Shelby County versus Holder in 2013, which struck down one of the pillars of the Voting Rights Act. The court, in that opinion, basically said, Congress, if you want to change this law, you can. It's just outdated at this point, right? And so Congress is invited and able to, at any time, expand these laws to protect individual rights. For some other examples that come to mind, Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, 2010, the court can certainly change our the money in our political system. And one example that I love to talk about because I'm an employment lawyer is the Lilly Ledbetter Act of 2009. That was basically Congress deciding to overturn court cases from 1998 through 2007 that determined that equal pay was not necessarily something that different demographic groups had in the workplace. And so Congress said, no, we think that women and men need to be paid the same, right? And California has passed a similar law since then. And so we'll also see that the legislature often overrides executive orders or policies. Um, you know, for example, DACA was a hot button topic a few years back, and Congress was all over the place trying to decide how to pass legislation to protect DACA, even though it was initially an executive concept that was being stripped. Congress had the power to step in and expand DACA or protect individuals who had certain protections under DACA. And then similarly, Congress often talks about funding or defunding different parts of the bureaucracy in the executive branch when it doesn't like what's going on, right? So if they think that the IRS is exceeding its authority, they will strip budget for the IRS, which has sadly happened a lot over the last decade or so. But at any time, they can step in and remove a branch, remove a bureaucratic organization, give extra funding to different bodies to expand education, to expand environmental health and safety, OSHA, things of that nature. And so Congress is really where all of this starts and where all of this ends when it comes to protecting individual rights. Go ahead, Sabrina. Oh, wait, I guess that's the end of this section, right? All right, we are on to the common good, and I believe Mr. Woods goes first.
think that's right. I think that is right. I appreciate um, the citation from my colleague to the Shelby County decision, where the Supreme Court said, "Hey, Congress, if you want to fix this, you can." And obviously, Congress got right on that, right? Right?
Right on it.
Oh, they didn't, because they never do. I think so. The next big topic in We the People in general, there's always a tension. You guys have picked this up by now. There's a tension between individual rights and the common good. That's where the meat of this program, that's where the rubber meets the road. And so we've talked about individual rights, and I've made my argument as to why the Supreme Court is the most powerful is to individual rights. And now I'm going to make my argument as to why the Supreme Court has the power to affect the common good, both in good ways and in bad ways. And again, we're not talking about whether they do it right. We're talking about whether they have the power to do it. The first and primary way in which the court itself affects the common good is that it is an expression itself of the common good. Courts in general, the federal judiciary, are a place to resolve disputes. And about some of those disputes are about fundamental rights and constitutional rights and the limits of the authority of the other branches. And some of the disputes are about employment litigation, like the litigation that Mr. Gentry gets involved in. Some of those disputes are about contracts. The fact that there is a place for people to work out those disputes is a common good in and of itself. They have objective rules, and we're not out there beating each other up or doing affairs to honor like Hamilton and Burr, where they're just shooting each other. The branch itself is there for everyone, theoretically, and everyone is subject to it theoretically equally, with the exception of the president, apparently. The branch itself is a reflection of rule of law, which is an expression, an aspect of common good. So that's the first way. It's not the biggest way, but I think it is the first way that it is an expression of the common good. Again, also, the Supreme Court can take actions to further the common good in the same way that protecting individual rights or hurting individual rights can be made through judicial decisions. So can the common good. I mentioned Dred Scott earlier. It's probably bad to have a big civil war. I think it's bad personally. The Supreme Court really lit the spark with that with Dred Scott. The Supreme Court can also, again, draw the boundaries around what Congress can do with the Commerce Clause power and the Elastic Clause power, and they have done so many times. Because, for example, in Wickard v. Filburn, the Supreme Court said, okay, if you're selling wheat, that affects interstate commerce, and so the Congress can regulate that. And then in Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the United States, the Supreme Court decided, okay, Congress has the power through the 14th Amendment, through the 15th Amendment, to regulate whether or not a motel can keep people of color out of the motel. And then later, in the 90s, in the 90s and 2000s, the Supreme Court, as is their wont, decided, you know what? I don't like how Congress is wielding the Commerce Clause power, and they started to rein it back in Lopez and Morrison, saying, no, you can't pass the Gun-Free Schools Act. No, you can't pass the Violence Against Women Act in the way that you want to pass it, because it violates the Commerce Clause. They did the same thing in the Obamacare case, which is what it's colloquially described as, which is actually National Federation of Independent Businesses v. Sebelius. They said the Commerce Clause does not grant Congress the ability to pass the Obamacare law. They still upheld it under the taxing clause, but again, that was the Supreme Court deciding, okay, this this law that theoretically affects the common good, it's okay. They could have gone the other way, and in fact, they almost did. So it's the power of the Supreme Court to affect that. There's a long line of equal protection cases that we can get into. Just recently, in 2020, the Supreme Court returned a huge percentage of tribal land to Native Americans in the McGirt v. Oklahoma decision. that was the Supreme Court affecting the common good of that community. We talked, the student panel earlier talked about the affirmative action cases. Again, that's the Supreme Court affecting the bounds of what Congress can do to affect the common good and affecting common good themselves. In Biden v. Nebraska last year, the Supreme Court decided, you know what, Joe Biden, we know that you want to get rid of certain student loans. You can't do it because of reasons. And then, just recently, just a few weeks ago in Loper Bright v. Raimondo, the Supreme Court really kneecapped the executive's ability to operate administrative agencies, and moreover said, not only are we not going to defer interpretation of the organic statutes that the Congress passes to the executive agencies, we're going to take that power for ourselves. So each federal court has the power to interpret the acts of Congress. The Supreme Court said they granted themselves that power, the federal judiciary that power in doing so. And it will drastically change how the federal government works going forward. It shifted the power of the federal government drastically from the executive to the judiciary. That will affect the common good. That will affect, administrative agencies like the EPA, like the FDA, to protect or harm the environment or food, drugs, those sorts of things. So it is the power of the Supreme Court to affect individual rights by using the power of judicial review and by determining the boundaries of the other two branches and the powers that they can wield. And with that, I will turn it over to, I think, Sean. Is it Sean? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to point out that I've asked in the chat about the most important things protecting individual rights and also the common good. And all of the answers on common good, I want to point out, are congressional acts, every single one that I'm seeing in the chat right now. And some great examples: the Affordable Care Act, a number of acts passed during the FDR administration, first 100 days of presidency, the Social Security Act and its amendments, the National Highway System in the 1940s and 50s, really, the National Park Service or Organic Act in 1916, I saw someone put, Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, Clean Air Act. I can go on. So, these are all ways in which Congress is promoting the common good. And I would say that that is Congress's primary purpose in our society, is to pass laws to promote the common good in this country. Now, we can disagree what things are good and not good, but generally speaking, Congress is passing laws to promote something that is serving society. So creating a highway system, creating regulations for keeping our water clean and how ships can navigate our riverways, all kinds of things. And so it really begins with Article 1, Section 8, that starts out with Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. If that's not the purpose of promoting the common good, then I don't know what the definition of common good is. That was sort of rhetorical, because I do know what the definition is. But anyway, the power of the purse allows them to levy taxes and then spend them for our interests. Starting in 1913, the 16th Amendment allowed for income tax and really, really ballooned the federal government in the last 100+ years. And now the federal government is the largest economy in the world, and passes all kinds of things and funds all sorts of executive agencies that serve purposes of promoting the common good. So the Federal Highway Act was in 1956. Really, really expanded our freeway system throughout the United States. Of course, we're very reliant on cars now as a result, but certainly at that time it was promoting the common good. They also then passed laws to protect the safety on those roadways and elsewhere. For example, the Federal Motor Carrier Act, the Department of Transportation was funded. They also have all kinds of police powers or polis powers. They fund the education system in this country. They provide a lot of money to state and local colleges and K-12 education. They even really oversee aviation in the United States with the Federal Aviation Administration, Federal Aviation Act, and all the regulations passed to keep our airways safe. Boeing not doing the best job lately, but Congress is certainly overseeing some of the safety issues we see there. They also passed legislation governing our military and safety in the military. Certain things like white collar crime see legislation like the Dodd-Frank Act, which is admittedly not the most powerful act you've ever seen, but certainly they are passing laws to protect us from white collar crime and other sort of fraud, immigration laws, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Congress can really create and modify these powers at any time, including creating and modifying the executive agencies when they want to change something in the way the executive is operating. Senate also has the power to affirm or provide advice and consent for appointments, including the major executive agency appointments, like for each executive administration, the cabinet directors. Some other laws that come to mind that some of these are near and dear to my heart because they're employment laws, but we have OSHA, FLSA, NLRA, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act of 1964, the CARES Act, which was passed under the Biden administration, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which I always think is interesting because it's the first national sick time law that we've had in this country, and it was a temporary one, but it was interesting. Infrastructure bills. Someone mentioned the Patriot Act actually back in the individual rights section, but that was passed about 20 years ago. They control things like FEMA and funds to the states in national emergencies. We even saw Congress step in into what I didn't really think Congress was going to weigh in on, which was restaurant tip pool laws that affected my industry or my advice about 5 years ago. And they really, and what I thought was interesting about that is they superseded both the Supreme Court and the Trump administration because both bodies were considering how to deal with these tip laws. Congress just came in sort of out of the blue and said, nope, we want to weigh in. We want to be the decision maker about how tips are allowed to be pooled in restaurants around the country. And so, we really see Congress can just step in for the common good at any time. And because of the supremacy clause, they also trump the state governments as well when we talk about federalism. When they choose to occupy the field in an area such as environmental policy, states cannot make laws necessarily that step on the toes of Congress. And so through all of this, we see that Congress is routinely passing and overseeing the other bodies of government in promoting the common good.
Interesting. My colleagues discussed a lot of interesting things, but what they seem to include in all aspects of their conversation is the role the president plays in all aspects of the things they mentioned. Whether it's the Environmental Protection Act, which, is in the hands of the president to enact as part of the Environmental Protection Agency, or, claims discussing all of these rules that they're interpreting for you, but at the end of the day, the president is the one that goes out there controlling the executive branch to carry out the common good. It is central to his role. And I'm just gonna, list some of all of the agencies and departments the president runs to handle everything that protects the common good in this country. The Department of Agriculture, the Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of the Interior, Department of Justice, the Department of Labor, Department of State, the Department of Transportation, the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Veteran Affairs, and, just a few other agencies, including the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, NASA, the National Transport Security Board, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The president has his hand in every single aspect of common good items within this country and has direct power to enact and act on those. Unlike Congress that just passes some bills that sometimes are read, or the judiciary, which sometimes sets the scope. The judiciary is a completely passive body. It cannot act unless something is brought to it. So it only gets to hear the select items that come before it, whereas the president is acting on the ground right away as things happen. Take the president's role in the COVID pandemic. The president was the one implementing emergency powers, accelerating the development of the vaccines, making sure resources were allocated to states as things were going through, and his ability to act in emergency situations. And the president's role really isn't limited in the same ways under the Constitution that, say, the legislature is limited to. As Teddy Roosevelt stated in his autobiography, I declined to adopt the view that what was imperatively necessary for the nation could not be done by the president unless he could find some specific authorization to do so. My belief was that it was not only his right, but his duty to do anything that the needs of the nation demanded, unless such action was forbidden by the Constitution or by the laws. In other words, I acted for the public welfare. I acted for the common well-being of all our people, whenever and in whatever manner was necessary, unless prevented by direct constitutional or legislative prohibition. Now, Roosevelt applied his expansive view of presidential power on numerous occasions, but most notably was his intervention in a national coal strike to broker an agreement between management and labor, and that resulted in a binding arbitration. Although neither the Constitution or the federal law expressly authorized this presidential intervention, Roosevelt took action for the common good. Similarly, President Reagan ordered striking air traffic controllers to return for work after their negotiations with the federal government to raise their pay and shorten their work week proved fruitless. When they refused, he ordered them fired. In addition to direct action, the ability to pass regulations is also a power of the executive branch, and regulations are tantamount to legislation in many respects. Congress knows that it cannot legislate minutiae, and hence when it writes legislation, it leaves large gaps. Although that has been affected by the most recent decision about interpreting executive power and overturning the Chevron doctrine, at the end of the day, the executive is the one funding people, putting people into the executive agencies to act on the ground. And it's only as disputes arise that the Supreme Court has any say in what's going on. And with that, I think the executive is the most powerful branch in promoting the common good. Now, I am mindful that we are running out of time and there has been a lot of great discussion in the chat. So what I'm going to suggest we do is go straight into the breakout rooms where you'll all discuss amongst yourselves and discuss and ask questions you think will help inform your decision. When we come back, you will be voting and we will decide once and for all who is right. So I'm going to have randomly selected people to go into 10 different breakout rooms. This is going to be automatic, but then I ask that the volunteers help facilitate discussion in those breakout rooms. And if there's too many of you in one room, find a different room. And then we can discuss any questions you have through the breakout rooms. We will be returning in 10 minutes. So I will call everyone back to the main room at 12:53. So I am going to set up the breakout rooms now. There we go. And again, co-hosts, which are our volunteers, please move to a different room if there's too many of you in one room. There should be 1 to 2 volunteers in each room. All right, welcome back everyone. And this is a great opportunity for everyone to turn on their cameras so we can see you all. It's been a bit of a black box, so it'd be great to see everyone to the extent you can turn your cameras on.
I hope everyone enjoyed our first of 3 summer sessions. We are coming to a close.
Yes. So, thanks for the lively discussions we heard in the Q&A period or in the breakout rooms. I'm setting up the poll right now to set it up. But in the meantime, does someone want to share? And it's okay if your camera doesn't work. That's fine. But if anyone would like to share some of the things you discussed on kind of your position while I set the poll up, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to just like do the raise your hand icon and I can call on you. I won't be offended if it's not the executive, even though you're wrong. Anyone have thoughts they want to share? All right, McKenna, let's hear from you.
Hello. Okay. My group kind of talked about how they all three have power, but and like traditionally the legislative was given a lot of power, but they don't necessarily use it very often. And so like in actuality, we're debating more about the judicial and the executive branch having more power and like active in our like our current day. So
Okay, let's hear from Ernest. I don't think we can hear you, Ernest, if your mic is
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
So, in our conversation, we didn't really consider the judiciary because we felt that it was too passive in like actually executing laws. So, when we considered the executive branch versus the legislative, we considered their um, like which is more important, making laws or executing those laws, and who ultimately gets the final say and whatnot.
Benji?
My group talked about how, in theory, the legislative branch has the most power out of all of the branches, but recently they've been having problems with actually putting that power into practice because of the party politics that dominate Congress's actions. And so we talked about how, like in the Constitution, like considering all of the powers that are given to the legislative branch by the Constitution, in theory, they should be the most powerful branch. But given recent political events like Chevron deference and the Trump v. United States case, we decided that the judicial branch might have a lot more power than the others.
And again.
I feel like Mac and Minji mentioned, the judicial or the legislative branch is definitely not the strongest, just because it loses most of its power due to party politics and the polarization in Congress right now. I feel like between judicial and executive, both of them have grown in power since their original foundations, but I think executive has more power just because it has the quasi-judicial powers within their like smaller organizations. But then also when it comes down to Supreme Court decisions, the Supreme Court can only really say something. The executive is the one who actually enforces it, whether it be through executive orders or actually like, for example, for Brown v. Board, they said that there's going to be equality, but when it came down to like actually enforcing it, the executive branch made executive orders to actually send out the National Guard and enforce it for Little Rock 9. And so I feel like the executive branch is the one that actually has the power and control. The judicial branch can say whatever, but like if we see Worcester versus Georgia, if the executive doesn't want to listen, it doesn't really mean anything.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks everyone for explaining it. Sounds like we got a mix of things. I'm really excited to hear the results of this poll. So I'm going to launch it right now. And I would like everyone to participate, even guests, or sorry, even volunteers. And I do get a little number that tells me the participation. It's there. We have 3 people left.
I don't get to vote. So 3 people might be me, Clint, and you. I don't know.
I can't vote.
I don't think volunteers or it's CACE volunteers can vote on this if you're an admin.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. So,
Right. It doesn't look like I'm able to vote.
okay. Well, then there's still 2 students who haven't voted. I'm gonna give you 10 seconds. Oh, we got, okay, one more left. So close. Okay. Excellent. Drum roll, please. Can you all see? I clicked share. Are you able to see that? The winner of this year is the executive branch
Woo.
at a 46%. In second place, the judiciary at 33%. In the last place, the legislative branch.
Oh, this feels like the olden days. It's been a while since the executive branch has won, I think.
Woo! Yes, just for context, there is no correct answer to this question, as you all probably have gleaned from all of our great conversations. But it is interesting because it changes year to year depending on what's going on in the news cycle. And so for the past couple of years, it's been the judiciary.
I think we had 2 years in a row of judiciary, and the year before that was legislature, and before that was probably executive.
Yes. And so
And it's often affected by current events, right? I thought judiciary was going to win this year because they've been very active. And there's these cases that have come up recently. Loper Bright and the Trump immunity case have been pretty game changing.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your participation. We really appreciate it. We had a lot of fun today talking with you. Our next summer session will be next Sunday at 10 a.m. same time. And I will be sending out an agenda and all the materials for that later today. And like this session, it will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at sabrina@caciviceducation.org. You should have got an email from me for the summer session. Your teachers also have my email if you forget it. But thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday.